Tomorrow afternoon, we've a Western domestic adventure when Joel McRae plays a doctor who becomes the subject of local gossip when he employs an Indian girl, Maria, played by Gloria Talbot. The Oklahoman is tomorrow at 3:25.
What you're about to see is an experiment, an exploration. Over the next 6 weeks, I shall be taking one family through a course of therapy in front of the television cameras. But in the last resort, it's nothing to do with me at all. It comes down to this one family. A very normal family that somehow went wrong.
Meet the Woolbis family tomorrow at 9:35 on 2.
In 15 minutes, Public Eye examines whether recent educational reforms will threaten the integration of children with special needs in mainstream classrooms. Now on BBC2, Russell Davis looks back at the week's events in What the Papers Say.
This week, What the Papers Say is presented by Russell Davis.
Hello. In our corner of civilization, it was not a big week for news, unless you haven't read a paper for nearly 2,000 years.
Jesus did not die on cross.
Said an up-to-the-minute front-page report in Today
By Nicky Pope and Nick Craven.
Clearly the devil's children.
Jesus was still alive when he was taken off the cross, a former doctor to the Queen claims.
And of course he would know, even if his Buckingham Palace notepaper is getting a bit yellow with age by now.
Dr. Lloyd Davies, honorary physician to the Queen from 1968 to 1971, puts forward his controversial theory in a leading medical journal.
When papers start scouring the medical journals for their lead stories, you know they're in trouble. Peterborough in the Telegraph, equally topical, featured a timely profile of Henry VIII.
He is tall, yet porcine. His eyes are small. He is 500 this year.
Congratulations, sire. Now, can we have some news, please?
The Reverend Megaphone blows in.
Well, that's a bit more like it. It may not have been real news, but it was a confrontation with the press, which pressmen always like because it dramatises them.
Descending demagogue takes a wrong turning at Heathrow.
Said the Mail on Sunday, but it was they who had taken the wrong turning. The airport in question was Gatwick.
The fat black American preacher, who is credited by his critics with the ability to reduce Britain to a burning cauldron of racial conflict, flew into Gatwick Airport yesterday in a bit of a huff.
The Reverend Al Sharpton, for it was he, appeared at first strangely silent.
This wasn't like him. Then his reason became clear. British newspapers had told lies about him, had rubbished him, had questioned his motives for coming to Britain on the 10th anniversary of the Brixton riots.
It was certainly true that some papers had taken a swing at Mr. Sharpton a whole week in advance.
The most odious man in America, and now we have to suffer him here.
There'd been a lot of this sort of thing, and the Sunday Times had viewed it all with distaste.
Thanks to the scare tactics of the British tabloids, he is guaranteed the oxygen of media attention.
Now, of course, the Sunday Times itself was hardly starving him of such oxygen, with headlines like,
The Big Apple's raving reverend rolls into Britain.
Mr. Sharpton is admittedly an eye-catching figure, and intentionally so. The extent of his reported bulk varied interestingly. The more our papers hated him, the more he seemed to weigh. The Times was soberly content to call him
The 17-stone Pentecostalist.
Monday's Mail, in an attempt to suggest they'd been privy to some sort of weigh-in, announced
He tips the scales at 19.5 stone.
several papers, including the Sunday Express, opted roundly for,
The 20-stone preacher.
though the Evening Standard hinted at expansionism in its reference to,
The 20-stone plus preacher.
and the Daily Star, never a paper to underestimate a foreign presence, as we shall see, gave us...
The 23-stone Sharpton, dubbed the Beast of the Bronx.
It was that last bit, according to the Times, that really got Sharpton's goat.
The most irritating thing was a headline saying that the
Beast from the Bronx.
had arrived.
I rang them right away to express my disgust. I'm from Brooklyn.
The Beast complained.
He hated the tabloid press, which had
Crucified.
him.
Though evidently the crucifixion process had failed again to kill the victim off, Mr. Sharpton managed to put in some live appearances in church. And while it's true that he lends little dignity to his cause, it must be said that the press's attempts to catch him in the act of doing visible harm fell flat.
The most damning thing you could say about Al Sharpton, the mad bad,
Serious incitement to racial hatred.
was that his timekeeping stinks.
Wrote Judy Rumbold, one of a number of journalists reduced to contemplating one another while they waited for Al to show up at a service in Brixton.
The press, appallingly underdressed and skulking in the back row, tapped its foot nervously alongside the flailing arms and swaying hips.
Not their style at all, as Mr. Sharpton well knew. When he did arrive, he pointed out that one of the achievements of his trip
Is that I've got the British press into a church. After reading what they have been writing for the last few days, I know that this is very necessary.
Having manoeuvred the scribes into this position, Big Al patronized them neatly with a prayer.
Bless even those who come here tonight with cynicism and criticism. It is faith that brings us through.
Faith in God, perhaps? Well, possibly. In Al's case, faith in publicity, more likely. And for the Sunday Express, faith in Britain.
We can cope with Al's silly ranting.
Of course, Sharpton intends to tour areas such as Brixton, Toxteth and Moss Side in the hope that his message will receive a ready hearing. It is possible that a few will be impressed, but Britain is a mature nation, more than capable of coping with the ranting of a silly tourist.
But the fact that Al Sharpton says there's a race problem can't be laughed off just because he personally is a loud fat man with a perm that would have sat well on one of the Supremes 25 years ago. Some papers have used Sharpton as an excuse for not taking the race question seriously. But The Guardian did spend a useful page last Saturday examining where Britain's far-right racist groups currently stand.
Racism rises on tide of propaganda.
Was the conclusion. And an accompanying editorial gave one strong reason why this should be happening now, after a period when semi-official racist groups have been comparatively quiet.
Mrs. Thatcher's ascendancy may also have blighted racist groups in the last decade. Why should anyone want to join the National Front when there was a Conservative leader who had made it clear she did not want Britain
Swamped.
with immigrants, was always eager to wave the Union Jack and never failed to speak up on law and order?
With the comparatively emollient Major now in charge, the neo-fascists might be expected to rise again. But this is not what The Guardian particularly fears.
Racist groups practice the least dangerous form of discrimination, overt and intentional. The two other categories, disguised but deliberate and unintentional but adverse, are far more troublesome.
On recent evidence in the press, I would agree. In which category, I wonder, would you, as a reader, place utterances like the following?
Good life, Britain.
Thousands of families pouring in every year.
More than 500,000 immigrants poured into Britain in search of the good life in the 1980s, despite laws aimed at stemming the flow.
That's just the general picture,
You want more? We've got much, much more.
bellows the Daily Star, and they have. You want the same sentiment in the form of a screaming front-page lead? Here it is.
How's that for cheek?
Asian family of 9 jet straight into council flat.
A family of Asians arrived in Britain knowing just one English word.
House.
And the Bangladeshi couple repeated it parrot style as they wandered the street with their 7 kids.
You'd like the same thing rehashed for the front page the next day over the rubric,
The Daily Star speaks its mind.
well, by all means.
Bloody stupid. Immigrant law must be scrapped.
Britain's immigration laws are a disgrace and a mess. We have turned this island into a refuge aplenty for foreigners.
Such as the father of the 7 kids, Abdul Mutleep.
Mr. Motley is a British citizen. He's lived here on and off for nearly 30 years. During that time, he's repeatedly returned to Bangladesh and fathered 7 children. Neither his wife nor any of his children can speak a word of English. They're about as British as a chapati butty.
This is a national newspaper, remember, not some kind of locally inflammatory leaflet distributed on football terraces. Connoisseurs of ripe humbug will have relished the personal message to Mr. Motley.
We wish him and his family all the best, but we also wish they weren't here.
Presumably this was meant to soften the previous day's Star editorial, for yes, the same thoughts came in that form as well.
Laughing at our expense.
Doesn't it make your blood boil? A Bangladeshi family of 8
Or 9, you know, doesn't really matter, they're all foreigners.
who speak just one word of English
House.
fly to Britain and walk straight into a nice council pad. The unemployed father was allowed to bring his whole brood over here to sponge on the state. We must be mugs.
Yes, Mr. Motley, the Daily Star wishes you well, and goes on wishing you well day after day.
Right.
Asian support Daily Star stand on migrant law.
The Daily Star stand against ludicrous immigration laws has been given massive backing by the Asian community.
For the 3rd day running, the story of the Motleeps was retold.
Just about the only word they could say was
House.
over and over again.
That message, I think, we have got. This was not reporting, after all, but naked propagandizing of an odious kind, repetitious and insistent. So we can't be too surprised that the Star was able to find comparatively well-to-do Asian Britons with an axe to grind against Bangladeshis.
This sort of thing makes me sick and is typical of Bangladeshis who just want somewhere to live and an easy life.
Raj Mahar, businessman.
In view of the news from Bangladesh in the last couple of days, the search for somewhere to live and an easy life becomes perhaps understandable. The Star went on to reinforce its view yet again with a phone line set up in the following terms.
Tell us what you think.
Ring our special lines to register your views.
Should immigration be stopped?
Should benefit laws be changed?
Result?
98%. Can we all be wrong?
In the biggest ever response to a Daily Star phone poll, thousands of callers demanded that immigration be stopped.
Well, blow me down, what a turn-up. For what it's worth, we were offered an editorial reassurance.
The Daily Star is not a racist newspaper. As we said yesterday, most of the immigrants who have made Britain their home have enriched it with their industry and culture.
With any luck, they'll have too much self-respect to be reading the Daily Star then, won't they? This is not the only example of a paper exploring the vacant right wing, now that the political parties seem to be clustering at the centre of the spectrum. We have, of course, The Sun, where this week the notorious Gary Bushell deputised for the notorious Richard Littlejohn. Sample Bushell joke.
How many Hampstead Liberals does it take to change a light bulb?
None. They form a support group called Coping with Darkness.
Littlejohn returned to work yesterday with the revelation that in America,
One of the most popular family restaurant chains is called Sambo's.
again, wet, white liberals were the target of the exercise.
In America, blacks are already turning their backs on white liberals using race as a means of self-advancement.
What he and many other columnists know is that there's a strongly paranoid strain in the British public who will always respond angrily to the suggestion that their freedom is being interfered with by people claiming to know better. This week's example, from the comedy end of the scale of world affairs.
The Great Snack Attack.
You may not have heard the name of the villain of the piece, but you'll recognise his shape.
16-stone Brussels bureaucrat Martin Bangerman
Soon all references to public figures will be accompanied by their weight.
is hardly flavour of the month with the British food industry. Not content with cracking down on Yorkshire puddings and Bakewell tarts,
Unless they're made in Yorkshire and Bakewell, respectively.
he's now out to crush our crisps. His department has ruled that several varieties of the nation's favourite snack will be illegal in 2 years' time.
As the crisis deepened,
Crisp manufacturers were meeting government officials to discuss how to stop Brussels bureaucrats banning such favourites as prawn cocktail, Worcester sauce, tomato ketchup, spicy chicken, sweet and sour, and spring onion.
and journalists made a dash for the usual rent-a-quote MPs.
Geoffrey Dickens,
19 stone.
Tory MP for Littleborough and Saddleworth, said,
Who are these miseries in Brussels? If I want to eat marmalade...